Hi, thank you for joining me today. My name is Heather Hagaman, and I am a trauma-informed yoga therapist. I specialize in addictions and trauma recovery work. I work mostly with people who are suffering from the lifelong effects of trauma, mostly with people who have had traumatic early life experiences. I will be talking first about what I do, and next I will share the case study and we'll sum up what I've shared here with a PowerPoint. And lastly, I hope to share a tool that I call Pause for all of you to experience at the end of this presentation. So what we know today about traumatic stress and trauma is that it is a universal human experience. Trauma can appear early in life, late in life, it can be small, it can be large, it can be sudden. The truth is, I do believe, though, there is an endpoint to all forms of trauma, and it's possible to recover fully from traumatic stress. Healing from trauma has a developmental path, all of its own with stages of healing. Being trauma-informed means to me that I work very hard on creating a safe, non-judgmental environment to help my clients to connect and feel safe in their bodies. Clients are given choice and control to connect and are encouraged to approach their practice with curiosity and mindfulness to develop body awareness. So I have a private practice in an addictions recovery center in Reston called Wellsprings Mind Body in Virginia. I collaborate with a licensed psychotherapist in this practice on his addictions cases. Not all my clients are dealing with addictions. I also see clients who have complex PTSD and developmental trauma disorder. There are some who come to me, though, because they have been injured in a car wreck and are afraid to drive, or they have lost a spouse to suicide and they feel numb inside their bodies. This is what I would call a form of shock trauma. Most of my clients are word of mouth. I get a lot of referrals from the psychotherapy and healing practitioners in the community and from an incredible studio called Beloved Yoga. I am also the director of trauma and recovery programs at Beloved Yoga. So just want to put a little plug in. For the last 7 years, the owner of Beloved Yoga, Miriam Ovisi, and I teach a 30-hour trauma-informed yoga certification program at Beloved and other venues and other places. We've been asked to teach in Colorado. We've been asked to teach around the area here in Northern Virginia. We combine yoga and science together into what I believe is a very unique program, one of its kind. And we launched our training earlier this year in June for the first time online, and we divided it into 2 modules. The second module will be in September, and we've gotten great response, especially for this first module. And what was really cool is that we had people from all over the United States joining us, so that was really neat. So you can read more about this training and my bio on my website and on Beloved Yoga's website as well. So earlier I mentioned I'm a trauma-informed yoga therapist and that I teach trauma-informed yoga. And I just want to share again that this is an approach that helps people to live safely and comfortably with their mind, body, and breath. So one of the things that yoga teaches is self-acceptance and helps us to have a friendly relationship with our bodies. So I really appreciate David Emerson's trauma-sensitive approach that I learned 10 years ago. And it goes like this. He wrote out, or he shared in the training, that it was very important that we befriend our bodies. And we do that in 3 ways. The trauma-sensitive way is to first notice you have a body, and that means locating your body in time and space. Second is you become curious about the body. And then you learn how to go to the body for regulation through breath and movement. So Dr. Bessel van der Kolk also was a part of this training. And one of the things he said was that, and if you don't know him, he's a renowned psychiatrist and expert on trauma. He said that trauma is not just an event that took place sometime in the past. It is also the imprint left by that experience on the mind, brain, and body. So I believe, and I want to just share this because I think this is a very important part of my work here, is that I believe untreated trauma is the root of addiction. I see addiction as a maladaptive coping strategy that a person uses to feel better. So depending on the age that trauma pierces the property, the koshas of the body, the 5 layers of the body, there can be a lifelong negative impact on the brain and nervous system. So in the last 15 years, we are now understanding that if chronic trauma is part of the lives of developing children, this is being referred to as a developmental trauma disorder. And this means that trauma was part of the developing of a human being under the age of 3 and even in utero. So again, if this trauma is chronic, I believe that a person's brain later in life is literally in pain. And the more pain a person is in, the more burdens the brain carries from the fragmenting effects of trauma, the more compelling addiction can be. So studies have shown that trauma depletes the 4 feel-good hormones: oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins. It makes sense, you look at it like this, that people would create a coping mechanism, or what is being called defensive accommodations, to use things outside of themselves to aid the parasympathetic response to essentially feel better and to flood their brains with pseudo feel-good hormones. So the therapeutic yoga trauma protocol that I use with addictions, with people with trauma, or call it yoga self-care, is essentially this. Is 1, educate the client about their defense physiology. 2, to really work on helping the client to cultivate compassion and understanding for how hard the body works to protect. And 3, to really learn how to befriend all the layers, the coaches of the body, with the use of yoga, asana, pranayama. I just want to do a little quick plug. There's a book that I know it's probably coming out backwards here, but it is a book by Susan Peace Bannock called The Trauma Toolkit. And I do suggest this to clients early on. It is a wonderful yogic approach. She goes through every kosha, starting with the physical, the breath, the mind, the wise mind, and the atman. She goes through all those different layers, and she gives you a lot of tools in each one of those layers. The other thing she does, which I found was very, very interesting, and it's now happening more, but back in the day when this book first came out, she actually gives you a troubleshooting piece in the beginning of the book to help you as you read the book. If you're feeling dizzy, nauseous, go outside. She gives you a way to deal with how to even read the book, which shows a very wonderful trauma-informed author here that helps you to even read her book with trauma-informedness. So I think that's very cool and worth knowing. Okay, so I educate a lot about the brain, the central nervous system, and the polyvagal theory. I do this so that when I introduce tools of breath and movement to the client, they're more willing to use what science has proved to be effective. You see, I know that trauma disrupts the ability to trust, and sometimes seeing things from the scientific lens can cultivate more trust. So I emphasize always that the journey towards feeling wholeness begins when we focus on the need for balance in all layers of our beings, and safety in all areas of one life so the body can heal. I also encourage people, and I do this a lot actually, is I always encourage them to please be tender, especially be patient with themselves, because this is what is needed for the healing process, right? So the first tool I give is what I call the pause button. And this is an acronym for a breath, grounding, and affirmation practice. This pause helps to keep the thinking brain online, the prefrontal cortex, and also can help the client to pause and not react to every stimulus, but to respond with resilience and hopefully make better choices and safer decisions for their body, mind, and breath. I then do a practice with them so they can feel calmer and activate their prefrontal cortex to help them take in the PowerPoint presentation. And this is what I do with my regular addictions clients, and not like what I'm going to be sharing with a client that's coming in hours after a traumatic event. So anyway, I'll come back to that. The first thing I focus on, and this is where I'm leading to, is that we have to meet people where they're at. So a PowerPoint right in the beginning may not be the way to begin, especially after a shocking event. Trauma shock is another way of calling this, is a psychological mechanism that kicks in automatically, much as physical shock does. It can be a fixed stare, a racing heart, feeling of spaciness, incongruence between words and a tone of voice, of feeling of being out of one's body, and there can be deceptive calmness. So it goes without saying that as trauma-informed yoga therapists, that we need to do our deep trauma work ourselves. We need to be grounded and present with our own tools to use while we listen and work with our clients. I cannot emphasize this the most, truly. We are the client's tether back to the earth in many ways. So I use the word being attuned to them. Being attuned is being aware and responsive to another. Attunement has a lot to do with our abilities in nonverbal communication. So emotional attunement can't be faked. Humans have emotional antennas which tell them when another person is feeling their feelings. Faked attunement falls flat. I'm repeating this because if you are interested in pursuing this kind of work, it requires you to be the best version of yourself and to have a daily practice of the highest self-care. So when I am working, let's say, with a person in early addictions recovery, I know that they're abstaining from the medicine that helped enhance their parasympathetic system. Most, if not all, addicts have childhood trauma and defense physiology that has been altered early on, which means that they have low vagal tone. That means that they don't have much access to their vagus nerve that helps to turn on their parasympathetic. Science substantiates this and calls this developmental trauma. I know that the person sitting in front of me is dealing with a constant dysregulated nervous system and are needing yoga tools to enhance their life experience without their addiction. I can't emphasize enough the importance of educating the client about their defense physiology through science, with the hope, again, of coming back to cultivating compassion and understanding for how hard their body has worked their entire life to protect them. People with trauma report feeling disconnected and oftentimes very angry with their bodies. So I feel like my job is to help them to find reverence back for the body and all its layers, to feel and to come back to the wholeness that's always been there for them. So this case study, Yogic Tools for Acute Traumatic Stress Injuries After Violent Assault, is a first for me. I have always wanted to work immediately with a client right after a traumatic incident. This client was a victim of an assault and what I call, again, shock trauma. This means this client will be having high emotional response to this terrible event. So immediately after an event, shock and denial are typical. Longer term reactions include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. So I had my first session with her 13 hours after the incident, and that was on May 24th, 2020. I thought if we as trauma-informed yoga therapists could be right there after the trauma and administer trauma-informed yogic self-care, we might be able to shift a person away from getting stuck into a lifetime of being in defense mode. We could quite possibly move the person through the post-traumatic injuries into resiliency and not into a disorder. Most, if not all, the trauma and addiction cases I see, the trauma has been seemingly hardwired into the central nervous system and stuck into the label of post-traumatic stress disorder and complex PTSD when the trauma comes from people. I'm going to read now an excerpt from the mother of the client that contacted me. I've been working with the mother for several weeks, and I appreciated that she told me this story because I know that her daughter probably had to repeat the story multiple times to the police, to the medical people, and to her family. I wanted to hear the story of her physical reactions to the event and would ask her to go back if she was comfortable and share about her protective defense physiology. This is the email, and I'll be paraphrasing this from the mother. She says, "A new situation just happened, and I'd like to see if your professional services might be available. My oldest daughter, a Navy lieutenant, late 20s, was riding her bike from DC to start a 4:30 a.m. shift at the big Pentagon. Another biker came from behind her, pulled her off her bike by her backpack onto the ground. Her awareness of him coming alongside her got her to quickly jump up and start to run away, but he came after her, and because of the weight of her backpack, she could not run. So she dropped her backpack and turned around, and she told me when I talked to her that she had two thoughts. First thought was, I could just let him hurt me. I have good health insurance. And the other thought was, well, I'm in the military and I've trained for this my whole life, and so that part of her kicked in, and she took a stance. She's a little girl, big guy, and she just put her fists out and she just said, "Don't F with me. I'm in the military," and kept screaming this at him. Mother says, by the grace of God, he hopped on his bike and took off. She called the police. They came. She gave a description. They were able to catch the suspect. They had her get in a cop car to view him, and is pretty sure he was the assailant. They took him to the police station, and an attorney is to be calling her. She continued on to work. Work told her to go home. She went then to the hospital to get treated for minor injuries. Mom said she'd be with her all morning. Okay, so I prepared myself for the meeting. I grounded myself, especially with good food. I also did a very grounding practice, and I set an intention to just be fully present for this person. I knew that this case required an immediate education of the understanding of defense physiology and the need for learning how to help the defense physiology dial down with breath practices, specifically longer exhales. Of course, I needed to meet her where she was at, and she wanted to understand what was happening to her. She spoke about shaking and teeth chattering several times when she went to call the police, and the second time was when she was at the hospital. I celebrated these responses with her and kept saying that this was the protective body and all the systems taking care of her. I also spoke to her of the importance it was right now to think of this as an emotional flu, which means she needed to rest, to eat lightly, have grounding soups. She needed to eat in parasympathetic, and I was going to show her some tools on how to do that. And number one, she needed to focus on being safe, and that meant at least in the next 72 hours, surrounding herself with safe people. I helped her understand that she was going to be flooding with feelings and physical reactions, and to allow them just to flow through her, and to continue using the pause tool that I will be giving her and gave her. Interestingly, she started sharing all the traumas of being in the military going back in time, and I reassured her that this was her amygdala, part of her brain. The limbic system was activated, and so the memories were flooding and of events that were similar. I reassured her every step of the way that this was normal, and to thank her body for protecting her. And again, to come back to that appreciation of all the hard work it has done and continues to do. So the cool thing is this was all done on Zoom technology and in a more accelerated approach, not like the approach I would do with a person who's in early recovery. I needed to work fast with her because she was fast, big energy meeting me. So in the beginning, we met online every 2 days, and then we began to add another day of space. But every session, I added more tools. We had more conversations. The client reported feeling more empowered by the tools. And currently, I'm meeting with her once a week, and she's continuing to report more homeostasis and self-regulation with her traumatic stress injuries. She said she uses the pause often. I gave her an evaluation questionnaire, and I'll be sharing some of the answers on the PowerPoint with you. But she said that this one helped her the most, and she continues to use it every day. So right now we're going to move into our presentation part. So I'm going to share my screen with you all. Okay. Whoops. All right. Okay. So here is my contact information. You can check my website out here. I have an email at both Beloved Yoga and at Resilient Yoga is my other email here. All right. Okay, so I'd like to just reiterate again. I'm one of the lead teachers at Beloved Yoga in the 300-hour training program, and I can't talk about this. I talk about this all the time. Meet people where they are, and this is where we want to meet people where they are. I'm always customizing the practice to meet their needs. Their success in maintaining behavioral change is strongly influenced by the yoga's therapist empathy. Clients who feel heard, understood, and not judged are more likely to trust their yoga therapist and be open to treatment. And again, I'm mentioning the word attunement. We need to be attuned to our clients, and that describes how reactive a person is to another's emotional needs and moods. I was with her every step of the way, breathing with her, cheering her on, hearing her tears, holding her space. I'll tell you what, here it is, going into August. I still have not met her face to face, and I long to give this woman a hug. What a brave human being. So you can see a person who's well attuned will respond with the appropriate language and behaviors based on another person's emotional state. So here's the protocol. I talked to you about that. I told you I offered books. This was somebody who read a lot, who wanted to know everything she could about everything I shared. She was absolutely hungry for knowledge and understanding. And this is one of the clients that I dream of, that want to really learn as much as they can about yoga. And actually, she wanted to know a lot about why is she here, because this kind of trauma just like made her realize she was at death's door for a moment, and like this hit her so hard. Like, what was she doing with her life? So coming back to always cultivating this compassion and understanding for how hard the body works, and then also learning how to befriend all the layers. I don't normally use the word koshas when I work with people in the beginning, but I will eventually teach them because they get so excited about yoga. They want to know everything they can, and I love teaching that. I will use, in the beginning, Durga breath and longer exhales, and I always do the 7 movements of the spine. This is basically some of the things I constantly use with my clients. So this is the first tool of resiliency, and I came up with this acronym. So it's, are you feeling uncomfortable? And I put in here fear, because it's usually fear, anger, anxiety. And it's this idea of pause, 1, 2, 3. And so basically I'm looking at how can we help the first 3 layers? Because again, when I mentioned before how Prakriti pierces the nervous system, right? And how it goes through the first 3 layers and can go into the, and the first 3 layers get affected. So our 4th layer, our wise layer, can maybe have that feeling of watching the episode, and then the Atman or the divine, whatever you want to call the Anandamaya, kind of is not accessible. But we can work with the first 3. So here's the quickest, fastest way to do this. Pursed lips, exhale, or ha breath if you're highly activated. It activates the vagus nerve. So it's that anchor down, get embodied, and that means small or larger movements, massaging, tapping, feeling the body, and then using the affirmation, I am here now, I am safe here, stabilize emotions. And this is just an acronym that I created for my clients to use. And we hopefully will have time to do that at the end here. So going into this from a, I teach them about the sympathetic, parasympathetic, but I really want them to see closely what exactly happens with the sympathetic. And this reduced saliva flow is so important because if they eat and they're sympathetic, they're not going to masticate and digest their food, and they're going to have constant stomach issues. Because as you can see here, the stomach as well gets, I'm going to turn my little thing on here for my pen. Okay, and so you can see here there's this reduced peristalsis and secretion in the stomach. And so all of these things, I have them understand this is all part of what happens in the defense mode, and that we need to take care, especially of the stomach area, you know, and eating. And then over here, I talk about the parasympathetic and how it's important to try to move into parasympathetic, eat in parasympathetic, stimulate your saliva flow. And, you know, I talk about the heart rate going down, this kind of thing. But I also talk about the ventral vagus nerve. And I talk about the vagus nerve first. I talk about the vagus nerve and I say, this is what we activate when we breathe and hum. This is what we turn on, and this will help us to come back into our parasympathetic. But if we are have gone so much into sympathetic, fight or flight, and we can't access those, we will go into what's an older reptilian response of the vagal nerve, which is called the dorsal vagal nerve. And this will actually cause this freeze response in the body, which explains why we can have a lot of gut issues. And so what we want to focus on is being in the ventral vagus nerve. And this is part of the polyvagal theory that I begin to introduce to them. But I'm very careful not to, and especially with her, I didn't go too far with it, but she heard polyvagal theory, she wanted to study it. And so I talked about how the ventral vagus nerve comes up in our heart, comes up into our face area. And this is another way that we can downregulate, is by having calming people around us, calming voices, calming sounds, having trusted people around us, a social engagement way of coming into our parasympathetic. Main focus, befriending the vagus nerve, or the inner eye of our body. And I give them information how 20% of this comes from the brain down, but 80% of our vagus nerve sends information up. And I show them this picture right here and talk about where this all wraps around the body, this wandering nerve. And I talk about when we exhale, there's this feeling, and I think, you know, and this is sort of Heather's opinion, that we get an internal hug when we have that long exhale and we are activating that vagus nerve. This is an important part of our surveillance system, and it can be activated by long exhales, humming cold water to the face. So Stephen Porges, who cultivated the polyvagal theory and really added that extra piece that the vagus nerve is then divided into these two sections, the dorsal and the ventral, he talks a lot about neuroception. And so when you say something is getting on my nerves, or you have a gut feeling, you're referring to the vagus nerve. And through neuroception, a term coined by Dr. Stephen Porges, the vagus is assessing the safety of the situation, the mood of the people you interact with, and that information is relayed to the brain. So one of the evaluation questions I asked was, did the trauma-informed yoga therapist foster a safe and trusting environment from the beginning? And she wrote, yes, I could quickly tell that I could trust Heather by her wide-ranging professional knowledge and her emotional intelligence, which is not a given even in this field, and how she carried herself. I knew she knew what she was talking about. I recognized her balance of authority and warmth, which definitely spoke to me. I go again into the ventral vagus, go a little bit. I talk more about this. This might be a second or third session. I just pop into it here, but I talk about how, stated in another way, it's our face-heart-brain connection mediated by the vagus nerve that we learn to really temper our responses to threats and challenges. Dorsal vagus, I look here, I talk about really important, the stomach and the gut and all those symptomologies that can happen with people with trauma histories. We see a lot of this irritable bowel gut issues. And sometimes I find out more about the client because they'll say, oh yes, I've got all of that. So then I know that they have a history of trauma usually. So the client reported after, and it says trauma-informed yoga, my approach has completely shifted. The question I asked her was, what did she learn from her experience? And she says here, and I'm going to move my little guy here down a little bit, I can feel my body respond with appreciation. I've come to see that every emotion we experience is intelligent and should be listened to, not stifled and swallowed in rejection. Instead, it should be listened to and shepherded by the wise, I'm going to move this down, self-led resonant self. And specifically my practices and tools included and still include the list. I'm having a hard time with this, but I'm not going to re-record. Okay, so you can see that she is listening to herself, She's learning, and this is something that she wrote out. She shared with me her goals in the first 72 hours where she really heard me. Safe people, grounding foods, long exhales, humming, massaging the body with oils, grounding and anchoring the body. And one of the things I just want to add here, which was really amazing, and if you think about this, oh my gosh, her mom, she had a really good relationship with her mother. Her mother came to her for the first 4 nights and massaged oil and held her while she slept. How beautiful is that? The affirmations, I am safe here, I am here now, everything is okay. She used that all the time. I go into the 3-part brain and I talk about, the brain from just understanding evolution. You got the brain stem, you got the limbic system, and go into the neocortex. And you can see here, take a bet which part of their brain in. I kind of educate about, what the base reptilian brain will be. Reactionary, emotional brain is this emotions as well. And the thinking brain is the slowest part of the brain. And I have a little discussion around that. One of the things I do too is I do the brain in the palm of your hand. And I talk about the thumb having the limbic system. This is all your emotional, the amygdala, the smoke alarm of your body, the memories, your limbic system wrapped in the deep core of your brain. This is your brain stem. And then you bring your prefrontal cortex on top of your hand. And I like to kid that, this is this could be a little symbol that you can do with people that I'm having a hard time right here. I'm beginning to flip my mind here. I'm flipping my mind, flipping my brain. All right. I talk about the limbic system, and I talk about the amygdala and these roles and emotional states, long-term memory, all these different things that happen here. One of the things I want them to understand is the amygdala and how oftentimes this is where we have an overreaction. This is amygdala hijack. And the 3 signs are strong emotional reactions, sudden onset, and post-episode realization if the reaction was inappropriate. And this is really important, and this really helps clients to understand what's going on with them, especially after a shock trauma like this. She was going to have amygdala hijacks often, and I used that to describe them, and it helped her describe them to herself so she could go to the pause and different tools that I taught her to help downregulate. I like to share this with clients so they understand when they're in limbic system a lot, they really need to cultivate the positive, hopeful state of mind. But here are some of the ways that I see this, especially in long-term limbic system people that are in their sympathetic all the time. These are a lot of the things that they present. Sympathetic, and then their dorsal vagal, which can be the sadness, the depression, that collapse, that freeze. But most of all, I hear a lot of negative emotions, hopelessness, helplessness, and guilt. Talk about the importance of activating the cortex, cognition, how important we need to live in that front part of the brain, and look at the things it's responsible for. So they need to be able to have logical thinking, keep language going, reading, things like that can help keep the brain online when you're having a hijack. Cortex is so important, develops, not fully developed at birth, it forms later on in life, but one of the things, it will be hijacked for safety. It makes wise choices, but it will be hijacked for safety when there's any real or perceived threat. And meditation and yoga profoundly influence your trainable prefrontal lobes as they help you concentrate, slow down the rate of thought, and feel calm in your body. I give them this chart. I tell them to take a picture, and I tell them that we really are working at being in the social engagement. We need to stay here in connection, safety, oriented to the environment. When they're interested down the road, I can talk gunas to them if they want to be interested in that philosophy. For now, I talk about this is the ventral vagal. We want to stay here. This is what we're trying to cultivate with our breath practices, our grounding practices. You can see the sympathetic. You go through these different energies. You can bring it back down and deactivate, but oftentimes people will go up to freeze. And I see freeze a lot with people with developmental trauma, because as babies and infants, they use that dorsal vagal freeze so much that the parasympathetic gets crippled for later use in life. So I see this a lot in addictions clients. So lastly, just want to say, my question was, did the sessions help you with what originally led you to seek trauma-informed yoga therapy? What are the 3 takeaways from trauma-informed yoga? Would you recommend this for others? So the client says, honestly, I would only recommend trauma and yoga therapy to people. That's how she thinks she was sold. She said, coming from a hatha yoga background and practice, I think a misperception is that you're going to be doing physical yoga the whole time and that most of the work is going to be physical. Much of our Western culture, including myself at first, doesn't know that yoga started in the mind and in breath. Trauma-informed yoga therapy has been the most deeply psychological experience I've had out of all the therapy I've tried. She told me that I was number 13 in this journey with therapists. Breath is everything. Never undervalue it or forget about it. This is still a daily practice for me. And this is really big because out of this experience, excuse me, I was just marking 35 minutes. I want to have 10 minutes for our practice. So out of this experience, was probably one of the most profound things I've ever seen, was to see somebody really do some great transformational work of her entire life and brought her back to her higher power. And this was great that we could go into these conversations about the Mandamaya Kosha, and I really love that she was open to that. So this was some of the things that I shared with her, but I thought it was so beautiful that she wrote this back to me. She said, everything happens for you, not to you. There's a divine plan and mission that knows and addresses all your fears and needs. There is no need to try and hijack your life's purpose and mission away from God. You are not in control. This is also not an excuse not to pull your weight in therapy. You are in control of putting in your work, and this work is no joke. Before choosing to pursue trauma-informed yoga therapy, you need to commit to your healing. Then the process of trauma yoga therapy will carry you where you need to go. I'm not sure how yoga this last point is, but it's been a big takeaway for me from our spiritual talks. Wow, what an experience. It was one of those experiences that when I saw this come out to talk about this for this yoga therapy day, I thought I really want to share this with the world because it's so powerful what yoga can do anyway, but to be able to work directly with someone from a shock trauma like this is probably one of the greatest highlights of my life. So coming back, I'm coming to the end here. My prefrontal cortex needs your prefrontal cortex. And this is this attunement. And we can talk about, there's a lot of things out there, like my right brain needs your right brain. You know, there could be other ways of saying this, but anyway, this is what I'm saying. And one of the questions, last questions, I said, overall, would you say trauma-informed yoga therapy was effective in the treatment of your situation? She said, yes. And anything I say about how effective trauma-informed yoga has been can only be an understatement. I think the yogi mind and its connection to body and soul is probably one of the only approaches to true full healing. High five. Glad I could share this with you all. So now I just want to finish off with this last little bit here called pause. So first thing we're going to do is we're just going to take our hands and we're just going to begin to stroke our legs. So actually let yourself, if you've been kind of slumping over or wherever you are, see if you can sit up for a moment and wherever you are. And oftentimes I meet people in a big way. I have them stand up and do this depending on the energy that's coming to me that day. But for right now, we'll just do the pause. So feeling your knees. So just go ahead and take a rub of the knees, the thighs, just rubbing. Feel the skin, the cloth. And then let your hands touch the floor and just feel the ground beneath your hands. Okay? So you're kind of anchoring the physical body down. And we're going to begin here by just taking a moment here, just keeping the hands, pressing the fingertips to the ground and let the palms come down if that's comfortable for you. And we're just going to begin with a pursed lips exhale. So take a breath in and exhale. Do this again. One more time. We're going to take our hands together and rub our hands together. Take a fresh breath in. We're going to take one palm to the front of the head, one palm to the back of the head, and we're going to again come back to that pursed lips exhale. We're going to layer the words as we inhale, I am here. As we exhale, I am safe here. Inhaling, I am here now. Exhaling, I am safe here. Let's inhale and cross over to the other side. Lovingly holding our heads, our brains, our skulls, and our arms. One more time. I am here now as I inhale. Exhaling, I am safe here. Bringing the hands back together here. We're going to inhale, open. We're going to exhale, cross the midline and tap on our exhale. Inhaling, I am here now. Exhaling, Excellent. I am safe here. I am safe here. One more time. Inhale and exhale. Let's try a ha breath here. Inhale and exhale. Good. Taking the hands together at the heart center, we stabilize our emotions. So please don't forget, pause often. Thank you so much for joining me today. Namaha. Namaste. Thank you. Really appreciate the time you spent with me. Have a good day.